This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
To the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me, our Locked On Falcons host, Aaron Freeman, and Locked On analyst, Jarvis Davis, and 11 Alive anchor, Maria Martin will be back with us next week. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And of course, our Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So some high praise for one of the coordinators, but what's going to be the key to his success? We'll discuss that. And speaking of success, how does one of the keys to that success, we'll tell you on which side of the ball, how is his success going to be dictated? It's going to be dictated by numbers, touchdowns, all of the above. We'll talk. And there's an assistant coach who just might have the biggest impact of all. We'll discuss. But first, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the high praise, Jarvis, that Coach Raheem Morris actually heaped on his rookies when he met with the media this week to start mandatory minicamp. Raheem Morris specifically talked about the top 4 rookies in this year's draft class getting a lot of playing time. That said, can Coach Ra afford to not play them in preseason, even if they are projected to be starters, because you have that expectation that they're going to be playing a lot?
Now, I don't think he can afford not to play them, because here's the thing. Like, when you're talking about guys getting acclimated to how fast the game is and being able to get on the field and be effective in game one, we talked about how that divisional matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is going to be huge. I want to see Baker Mayfield on the ground. And you can't have James Pierce Jr. coming in getting his first action in that game. Like, I just don't see that. I don't foresee that being a way for them to be successful, especially if they're expecting those guys to play so many snaps this year in year one versus last year, where that rookie class, they got in and they got a couple snaps here and there, and then Rook got hurt, and then Brandon Dorless was inactive most of the season. So when you think about it from that standpoint, like what the expectation is coming in, and we knew that more than likely that the rookies weren't going to play that much, but we didn't think it was to that extent. So coming into this season with the rookies, and you got some guys who are going to get starter snaps for the most part on the defense side of the football. Yeah, those guys got to play because they never played in the league before. Jalen Walker can look amazing in practice. By the way, he does. But he has to get that game experience. It's nothing like live game action. I know people talk about different elements of the game, or in preseason is different than the regular season. Sure. But absolutely, you better believe everybody and their mom who's out there, they playing hard, they going hard, and they're playing NFL caliber football to try to get to game one so they can be effective.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, Jarvis, like you said, if you want them to be effective in game one, they're going to need as many reps as possible. Now, we know, Aaron, that there will also be some joint practices, obviously, on some level that will help. But I think we can all agree that there were rumblings after last season, like, wow, sure would have been good to get more of those rookies out there in the preseason, because that would have given them the opportunity to have 3 more, 1 more, 2 more times to get ramped up versus actually having their ramp up be regular season games.
Yeah, especially when you factor in that, like, they didn't play in the regular season. And
then exactly. Yeah.
And so like you needed those reps to come somewhere, and they didn't come anywhere. And, I agree everything with Jarvis said. Like, I think these guys need to play, but knowing Raheem Morris, like, he's going to be not really, so I'm just fascinated to see that decision-making process. Is Raheem going to make the decision? Well, it's like, well, they're going to get the reps in the regular season, so I don't really need to play them during the summer, or, we don't want to deal with the injuries. And it's going to be one of those things like we saw with Penix in the first game last year, where he played like a half and then never again. And it was just like, all right, I'll play James Pierce and Jalen Walker for a quarter. We'll give him 3 series in that first preseason game against I think it's Dallas or whatever, or maybe that's the third one. That's it. And it's just like, okay. I mean, I get it. Like, I think we all understand where Raheem Morris is coming from with his approach to the preseason, but it doesn't mean that we all agree with it, So like, it's one of those things where it's like, I'm it's going to be, we're going to be having these conversations in August, and we're going to be debating it again in August. But I'm very fascinated to see how Raheem Morris approaches it. Does he I need these guys ready to play week 1, so I'm going to give them those reps throughout the preseason, even if they are on the pitch count, or is it going to just be like, nah, we don't really need to invest in that because I believe in my ability to get these guys ready in practice, and it's like, sure, Raheem, good luck to you.
Free, here's the thing though, Free. Like, I look at it from this standpoint because I was sitting out there at practice this week and just looking at, they had their what you call, a young guy period where they got all the young guys in there. There were a lot of guys that I pointed out as I was sitting on the sideline. He gonna play, him gonna play, he gonna play, he gonna play. I was like, so you mean to tell me that this is just your young group, right? Because your rookies mostly, it was mostly rookies out there. That's your young group. And then you got guys who are in their second and third years, fourth years, contract years that have to play also because there's some guys going to be fighting for some roster spots. I was looking at D'Angelo Malone. Oh my gosh, I thought my man was sick. The man is like 235. He's skinny, and he's playing outside linebacker, same spot that Jalen Walker is. So when you think about, I just think from just a competitive standpoint, guys going to be competing for reps. It is so hard for me to sit up here and say that Raheem Morris is going to say to himself, he's like, yep, I seen what all I need to see in practice, and I'm be able to set my rotations. And Jeff Obrey is going to be comfortable with this player playing in front, this guy getting more snaps than on KT, or this guy, Zach Harrison, getting more snaps at the big nickel than Brandon Dorless. It's just so hard for me to sit up here and say that he's going to feel comfortable or Jeff Obrey is going to feel comfortable with those guys not playing in real game action. And it's free. Like, you free. You can just let them go. Just go let them play, and you can see what they do. Even if it's like Free said, a quarter, a series, a few series, even, a whole quarter, whatever. I think that it's just, I know how you feel about this, Free, but it's just, I don't think that Raheem Morris can afford not to play these guys because you're counting on so many young guys. You got to see what those guys can do in live game action.
I agree. Aaron, if I may say, specifically for Jalen Walker as well, if the thought is that he's your most versatile guy, arguably, in this draft class, and he's your guy who you need to have an immediate impact, how do you not put him in those preseason games to see if I line him up in different situations, how is he going to react? Where is he most comfortable so that he can be impactful early? And then where are some areas of improvement where maybe we can get into the toolkit a little bit later in the season? How do you not see that? How do you not utilize preseason for that reason?
Look, you guys are preaching to the choir. I'm 100%.
I'm about to pass collection plate right this time.
Like, it's one of those things where it's like everything you guys are saying, I'm like, yes. Can we clip this and send this to Raheem? Like, please, Raheem, listen to this. My concern, like, you
can get it from Terry. Terry watches.
My thing is, like, I set my expectations low. So I sit here and I go, my expectations are we're going to see maybe 2 series of these guys in the first preseason game, and then Raheem's like, I saw all I wanted to see, we're good. And I'm just like, all right. Like, that's those are my low expectations. I hope Raheem comes in and exceeds those expectations. But I agree with you. Yes, like, getting these guys comfortable in different roles with a new scheme, particularly a player like Jalen Walker, you kind of want to see what he does. Like, getting 2 snaps or whatever, rushing as an off-ball linebacker on third down is like all well and good, but like, let's see different things that he can do. Let's see what some of these guys can do in different role, rather than just basically using the preseason as a, we already know who 47 of our 53 guys on the roster are going to be, and we're just really sending the rest of everybody out to figure out who those last 5 spots are. And it's like, do I need 3 preseason games to figure out who the last 5 guys on the roster are going to be. Like there's other value to these guys performing and getting them ready and playing around. That it's like, it's the same thing with practice. I saw a quote from Kyle Shanahan the other day about, being upset about like how reporters treat practice now, where they're like cataloging, how many passes you complete in practice and whatnot. And it's like, we don't care about that stuff anymore. Like, I want you to make mistakes in practice. It's like, that's the whole point of practice. It's like, this is an environment where you are afforded the ability to make mistakes. And it's a similar thing with the preseason, where it's like the games don't count. You can see what guys can do. And like, you can push some limits a little bit. And, I think that's a real value to it. And I don't think the Falcons, at least last summer, did a great job taking advantage of that value.
Yeah, and I think too, Jarvis, the other piece is this. You have an opportunity against a Detroit team that's probably going to put at least some of their players on the field, some of their starters, right? And that's a good, if not great, NFC team. Then you've got the Tennessee Titans, who I can't imagine they're not going to do the same, because they're in rebuild mode, and they probably need to look at everybody and see just what they're working with. And you could kind of say the same thing for Dallas. Obviously, the third game is almost always kind of a game where nobody really puts anyone out there. But in case there is an opportunity, it wouldn't be a bad team to put your players up against. And also not just the defensive side of the ball. I know we're talking about Jalen Walker and sort of having the opportunity to see him in multiple situations, but on the same token, a couple of extra reps with Ryan Newsel and Michael Penix Jr., game time action wouldn't hurt anybody. And I think too, Jarvis, we talk about not just the preseason and opportunities there, not wanting anybody to have real-time reps that come in games. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Minnesota Vikings, skip the Panthers, Washington Commanders, and Buffalo Bills. Those are your first 6 games. And I might throw in the San Francisco 49ers in week 7, because I don't think they're as bad as, they may not be as good as people think, but I don't think they're as bad as people think they're going to be either. Point being, Jarvis, if you have that gauntlet in the first 6 to 7 weeks of the regular season, is that really where you want those extra preseason type reps to happen?
You know what? You know who wants those reps? Who wants to be out there? How about Kobe Bryant, Clark Phillips, and D. Alford? Like, come on now. Like, that's supposed to be a real, true battle, right? So I not necessarily Ryan Newsel and Jovan Gwynn. We know who's gonna be the starting center. Like, I understand that part. I get that, but when you got those borderline guys, like I was watching I was out there for Jesse Bates. I was watching Jesse Bates, talking about after practice, and he was just talking about how DeMarco Hellams and how it's going to be good to see him come back, and can he find a role for himself and his team? Those guys like that, Braylon Trice, like that man's been lost in the sauce. So you mean tell me he's going to be guaranteed? I mean, no, he's going to be on the squad, right? Your 3rd round pick, draft pick. I get that, but like he got to get on the field and prove what he can do. Because you got 2 edge rushers you drafted in the 1st round. We know those cats going to play, right? Then you got Arnold Ebiketie, who's going into a contract year. So it's just so many moving parts, so many guys who haven't established themselves from a rotational standpoint. We barely even know who's going to be the starters, really. Is Root going to step in to be a starter right away opposite David Onyemata? I don't know. We don't know. We don't know that. I mean, we can assume, sure, he's a second round draft pick. 2nd year in the league, he should be ready to roll. But I can't make that assumption. He got to get out on the field and prove it. So how do you do that? You do it in the games. So I think just from a standpoint, are guys going to be competing for spots, guys going to be competing for reps in the rotation. So it is just so hard for me to sit up here and say, yep, Ryan ain't going to do it. I get it, Freak. I understand where you're coming from, my brother. But golly, man, like things change. You got to evolve when it comes to certain things, because your team is different every year. Last year, I kind of get it, right? Everybody was pretty much set on the defense side. The whole roster was set. I think you've been generous by saying 47, probably 40 to 50, were pretty much set. You knew who was going to make this squad. So, but now it's like, you're going to make the squad, but you have no clue who's going to step up and be that guy for you at the nickel spot, right? Or at the edge spot, those young guys. Like who's gonna rise to the top? And I think that you do that by playing the games, and those guys bringing it to the field. Practice matters, sure. Not gonna sit up here and say that, but man, those games matter too.
Yeah. And I think, too, you make a great point, Jarvis, about the fact that, yes, we started the conversation talking about the 4 rookies in this year's class that Raheem kind of specifically spoke about. But let's face it, this is really an expanded rookie class because of the very things that you mentioned about the class of 24 between the inactivity and the early injuries.
You have no clue what those guys are. I have no clue what Rook going to be. No. I have no clue what Brandon Doyle is going to be. No. I have no clue what Braden Trice is going to be.
Exactly. So you really and truly need to be looking at the preseason as a coming out party for them or an assessment opportunity for them as well. So I can't see how you could not play not just the 2025 rookie class, but if we're being honest about it, the 2024 rookie class, half of which is still kind of in rookie status because of the very things that we mentioned. So I know that sometimes coaches have their way of doing things and it's kind of like a superstitious way that they go about it. But this is one of those where you might have to break with your own philosophy just for the betterment of not just the impact of this year's rookie class, but even the class last year. But speaking of the impact, Coach Raheem Morris, had a lot of good things to say about Jeff Ulbrich and his impact on the game. We'll talk about that when we go under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Skylight Calendar. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. What would it mean to eliminate the I didn't know excuse from your family's routine? Could assigning everyone their own color finally solve the who does what confusion in your house? I tell you, there's an influencer that hit me to this as well, the Skylight Calendar, and I got to tell you that the color scheme, it may sound a little anal, but it works. And I got my nephew here for the summer. He's a burgeoning track star, so we've got track practices and track meets, and I got to keep all of that stuff together. Skylight is the way to go. So right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylighthtcal.com/NFL. So Aaron, Jeff Ulbrich has received a lot of praise so far from Coach Raheem Morris and Jessie Bates III. In fact, Coach mentioned specifically the discipline, the effort, the detail, the leadership Brick has brought to the table. But for you, what's the real key to success for this defense under Jeff Ulbrich? Is it all on Ulbrich and how he moves relative to even things like we talked about just a moment ago, how he's utilizing and preparing players for this upcoming season?
To a certain extent, yeah. I think the key when we talk about what's the biggest key for this defense this upcoming season, it's the thing that we've been talking about, the key for every Falcons season, the pass rush, right? With some of these quarterbacks, and we sort of outlined some of these quarterbacks that the Falcons are going to have to face in the first 6 weeks if they want to come out with, a 500 record or better, to start the season 3-3 and really be, in a position where they can make a playoff push and not have to dig themselves out of a hole to start the season. They're going to face some quality quarterbacks, and we know that the key to slowing down some of these quality quarterbacks, especially when you have a couple of questions in the secondary, you have a couple of solid pieces in the secondary, but you have a couple of question marks at the cornerback spots opposite AJ Terrell and at the safety position opposite Jessie Bates. You want to be able to get pressure on the quarterback so that you don't have to maybe worry as much about Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and some of these weapons that the Falcons are going to be facing that you don't necessarily feel that great about their ability to match up one-on-one with those guys. And so I think when it comes to Jeff Ulbrich, it's like, how do you not only scheme up a pass rush, but how do you go about generating that pass rush, right? Where it's, we know that Jeff Ulbrich wants to be the type of defense that I can just rely on 4 guys to get that pressure up front. And so therefore I can drop 7 into coverage and deal with all those weapons.
Mhm.
And, do the Falcons now, with the investments that they've made, have that ability to be able to reliably scheme up a 4-man pass rush? That has been something that the Falcons have not necessarily had. And then on top of that, if you're not getting the results early on, if James Pierce isn't coming out there week 1 and beating Tristan Wirfs and whoever else he needs to beat in order to get that reliable 4-man pass rush, how are the ways that you're able to manufacture that pass rush to supplement them? Or are you going to use the simulated pressures that the Falcons utilize? Are you going to blitz a lot more? How does that look? Are you going to be aggressive on some of these early downs to basically say, like, we're not going to be this sort of passive bend but don't break defense that we have been these last couple of years, whether that's under Jimmy Lake or Dean Pease and whatnot. We're going to be more of that aggressive style of defense. And so that sort of identity and that sort of mentality, that's going to come from Jeff Ulbrich. And so I think that's why, like, he's an important part of, how this defense is going to perform early on in the season. Is it just simply, hey, we're just going to rush 4 and then, like, we get a couple of games into the season? Is that working? Do you make the adjustments? Those are some of the things that Jeff Ulbrich is going to have to do early on in the season that we haven't necessarily seen consistently from previous coaching staffs on that side of the ball. So I think Jeff Ulbrich's a big part of it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, though, we know that on defense, at least, it's more about the Jimmies and the Joes than the X's and the O's when it comes to, how defenses perform. But, you as a defensive coordinator can kind of set the culture, set the mentality, set the identity for that defense. And I think X's and O's are going to matter a little bit more, at least early in the season for this Falcon team.
Yeah, and I think Aaron makes a great point about the fact that it's not so much about the X's and O's, but it would be about how Jeff Ulbrich sets the stage with his Jimmies and Joes, because I thought it was interesting that those are the 4 key characteristics about Jeff Ulbrich that Raheem Morris mentioned: the discipline, the effort, the detail, the leadership. Now, not saying, for example, I don't think I necessarily heard any issues coming out of the locker room with Jimmy Lake and his inability to have these guys play discipline ball. The effort, however, at times was questionable for these guys, and whether or not Jimmy Lake had lost that locker room. I feel like a guy like Jeff Ulbrich is someone who can get that maximum effort out of these players. I feel like the detail, just from even when he was the interim DC, I feel like we saw some things there. And obviously we know the work that he did during his time and his tenure with the New York Jets. But the leadership piece, I think, is going to be so important as well, because remember, we are talking about such an inexperienced defense. So I think all of those pieces said, yeah, Free is right. We can't say he's 100% the key to success, because he's not going to take the field. But boy, is he going to be a big key to success, because he has to set the stage for those guys to execute.
Absolutely. And when you think about what the setting the stage and what leadership means, it means about, okay, what's the mindset? Like, how do I want my guys to look at Sundays?
Yes.
How do I want them to approach it? Right. Like, I think about a golfer when you getting ready to set up a shot, and you're about to hit it off the tee. And I always going through all of these things in my mind. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I visualize myself hitting it 400 yards off the tee. But you know what I'm saying? But until I actually go out there and execute it, it can go either way. Right. And I know for a fact it's going to go either way when I'm hitting it off the tee. But I think that with this attacking style of defense, and you already have players like Rook. I got a chance to talk to Rook this week, and just the way he kept saying attack. It kind of brought me back to the last time the Falcons had a decent defense in 2023 when Ryan Nielsen was the defensive coordinator, and the talent level on that 23 team doesn't even compare, in my opinion, to what Jeff Ulbrich is working with. So I think that Nielsen came in, attack, intense dude. Super, you know what I'm saying? Like, understanding what it means for his guys to play up front. And I think that Jeff Ulbrich delivering that same type of style of mindset, that's going to be the thing to kind of really get them over the top. Because when you have a defensive lineman, like I was talking to Root, he said it himself. He was like, yeah, man, the difference for me is instead of kind of feeling the blocks out, trying to see where the guy's going, and then kind of engaging it and going where I need to go. It's just all about attack. Like, okay, so basically you just described to me that y'all were in the 1.5 gap scheme, and this year y'all just gonna be like, go. You know, you got this gap, this is your spot, this is your space, this is where you need to attack, and this is where you need to be when that ball is handed off, regardless of run or pass. And I think that's going to be the biggest difference because, you know, like you said, 23, they didn't have as much talent, and they still were able to be serviceable defense. But in 25, you have a lot more talent. You're coming with a similar mindset when it comes to what you want to do and who you want to be on defense on the deep side of football on Sundays. I think that's a recipe for success in my eyes.
Now, Aaron, speaking of those guys, Rook Ororo and Brandon Dorlus, a lot of times people kind of talk about them like they're 1 and 2 freaking frack A and B when it comes to their development. So speaking with the media Wednesday, Raheem Morris mistakenly, I put that in air quotes, referred to the tandem as Brandon Rook. So should we then have the same expectations for Rook, for Brandon? Should they be talked about as this collective?
To a certain extent, yes. I still think at the end of the day, because the Falcons traded up for Rook, they took him in round 2 as opposed to round 4 with Dorlus, and that we did get to see Rook play last year. And if not for that injury, would have seen a lot more of him last year. Mm-hmm. That he's coming in with higher expectations just because, you know, Dorlus played like 11 snaps or something like that, something ridiculous.
You're being generous,
you know, and so you know, so like I can't really have the same expectations for Brandon Dorlus, basically completely redshirting as a rookie, as I do with Rook Ororo, and especially given where they were selected, and so the circumstances around their selection. So I think they are definitely in the same bucket, because when we talk about one, we're always going to talk about the other. But at the same time, I do put like Rook slightly above Dorlus in terms of what my expectations are for him going into year 2.
Yeah, and for you, Jarvis, when you look at those guys sort of as that 1-2 punch, fine to make the comparisons, but is it okay that we're having like the same expectation for them? Or do you, based on like what Free was saying, do you have different levels of expectations for what they're going to bring this season?
They have to be different from me, like, you know, because, you know, I'm still a little sick that, you know, they passed on a couple of D tackles, or a certain D tackle that shall remain nameless, you know, on the West Coast. You know, we'll just leave it like that. He's out there on the West Coast, you know, and they passed him up, and the man had a hell of a year last year. But no, in all seriousness though, I think one of the thing for me is that when you talk about a second round draft pick, you cut the mainstay at the defensive tackle position. Now, if they didn't cut Grady, you probably mine be a little bit lower. But you know, I try to be reserved when it comes to certain guys, especially a guy like Rook. When I wasn't necessarily that high on him coming out of college, you know, coming out of Clemson. So but my expectations are much higher for him than they are for Brandon Dorlus, because just from a value standpoint, hey, second round picks, those are starters. Like mid to late round picks, those are guys like, hey, if those guys give you get into your rotation and be solid and ready to roll, that's a good thing. But no, you talking about second round pick, yeah, my expectations are much higher when it comes to that type of stuff.
Yeah, and I would think the same. I think that you hit the nail on the head. When I'm thinking of a second round pick, I'm looking and I'm saying, okay, all right, Rook, what we're doing. Like, we saw flashes, we saw shades, didn't see it on enough of a consistent basis. But yeah, while we may have some high expectations for both of those guys, and maybe call it same because they're both high expectations, I don't know that, yeah, you can have the same expectations for what those players are going to bring to the table. But a high round pick, as in their first round pick overall for the Falcons, yeah, still high expectations for him. But what does that actually mean in terms of, is it numbers, yardage, touchdowns? What's that next level for you for 7? We'll talk about that in Next Up. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA Finals are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Which players are showing up in the biggest moments? If you were actually paying attention to the performance trends, you would have known Benedict Mathurin was going to shoot the lights out of the ball last night. How could tracking their trends help you build your next bet? Well, I already gave you a hint, right? What would it look like to combine live prop bets mid-game based on how the action unfolds, especially in the all-important fourth quarter, which decided the game, the first game that the Indiana Pacers won and the second game that they won. So Friday night, you might want to go into that space of what that fourth quarter looks like. Might be a good look to determine the outcome. New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. Now, if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So Bijan Robinson obviously continues to shine. I mean, the things that you see him do in practice, they absolutely make you smile. And Raheem Morris mentioned a cut that Robinson made that almost made him shut practice down. That's how bad that guy is. I mean, it's a joy to watch him run, but it's also an encouraging thing to see him continue to evolve his skills. We've talked about that just in terms of his commitment to being a better pass catcher, his commitment to being a blocker so that his receivers can get free. So fast forward and look forward, Jarvis, to the end of this season, especially if you think about a Falcons team and how they get to the playoffs. How maybe this Falcons team even gets to host a playoff game. If that happens, think about Bijan Robinson and where he falls. Regular season numbers. Is there a number, yardage, or touchdowns? Let's start here. That you would need to see in order for you to know, oh, yeah, the Falcons are in the postseason? Or are there numbers that you would be surprised by? But let's start with, what are some of those numbers that you think you need to see in order for you to know Falcons made the playoffs?
I think 1,700 yards rushing. I know that's kind of high, but, I think if he's at that number and he rushing for maybe like 4.7 a pop or 4.8, that's how you know he's got those explosive plays. That's how you know the wide receivers and Darnell Mooney's and the Drake Londons of the world, those guys are blocking downfield. Kyle Pitts don't figure out how to get in front of someone to keep him from tackling 7 in the backfield or whatever. So I think if you get that 1,700 yard rushing number and maybe between 8 to 10 touchdowns, at 8 to 10 touchdown range, I feel like that'll be one of those things that you can look at and say, I wouldn't be surprised by it. And I'll be like, okay, yeah, the Falcons are probably in the postseason if he's able to achieve those type of numbers.
And Aaron, what Jarvis is talking about is it's not ridiculous. It's not pie in the sky. It's not having kind of, as I like to say, skipping through the tulips with the idea of what Bijan Robinson's season can look like. Because if you look at where he's been his first 2 seasons in the league and how he's improved, first of all, your availability is your biggest ability. So let's give him credit for his availability in his first couple of seasons and playing 17 games both seasons. Secondly, you go from 214 carries that first season to 304, from 976 yards to 1,456. Your average even creeps up by a couple tenths, so you're closing in on nearly 5 yards a carry, 14 touchdowns. I mean, everything trending up for this guy in every statistical category. So what do you need to see for that next trend up, that next uptick for you to be like, yep, Falcons made the postseason, or yep, Falcons are, hosting a postseason game?
Well, it's interesting because this time last year, Bijan was bringing up Christian McCaffrey as like the guy, I want to put up those types of numbers. And he put up pretty much very similar numbers to Christian McCaffrey. It just kind of got overshadowed because of the years that Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry had. And we would be talking about, oh my God, what an incredible season that Bijan had. Basically he had RB1 numbers that you would have most years, but last year was a unique year where we had two guys that were like RB0 if you can go to a higher level.
RB amazing.
Yeah. Negative 12 in terms of ranking these guys and how much better they were than the typical RB1 was.
Right.
And now you're hearing Bijan bring up Saquon. Like, okay, I'm trying to do those Saquon numbers. And like part of me is like, okay, like you know, the prophecy was foretold last year with Christian McCaffrey. Let's see if you can do this. Like, I don't think it's fair to have those you got to rush for 2,000 yards rushing and 75 touchdowns or whatever Saquon Barkley had last year. You know, like I don't think that's a normal expectation for a running back. But at the same time, I'm like, if someone's going to be able to pull this off, Bijan's the one guy that I would be willing to bet that has a chance to do that. And I think some of the things that we're talking about with, you know, especially getting those explosive runs and going from a guy that, as you said, was averaging like 4.8 yards per carry. And, you know, we've seen guys like Saquon and others, you know, averaging well over 5. And that number is a representation of, you know, popping off those 40, 60, 80-yard runs that we're expecting. That's the kind of the last hurdle that Bijan needs to achieve. Like he's like 99% of the way there. Is that last 1% is just, hey, let's get a sprinkling of these big explosive runs in there. And if he can do that, in addition to, you know, maybe we'll see a little bit more of an expansion of him in the passing game. We saw it kind of late in the season against Washington, where they were able to try to feature him a little bit more as a pass catcher. Like, you know, he's going to get, you know, a lot of those opportunities as a pass catcher, you know, with check downs and all those various things, but getting those opportunities where like, okay, no, the design of the play is to go to Bijan Robinson through the air. You didn't have as many of that. And some of that is owed to the fact that he was such an integral part of the team's pass protection, of how good he was with those 6-man protections, that you're like, he's too valuable. He's keeping Michael Penix, or at least last year, Kirk Cousins upright. So he can't be featured as much as a pass catching weapon. And so part of me wonders, you know, is that something that we're going to see a little bit more in terms of two running back, you know, formations where both him and Tyler Algier are both in the backfield. And now you can have Tyler Algier still stick in there to be that pass protector in those 6-man protections, and that will allow you to use Bijan a little bit more as a pass catcher in addition to that. So I think there are ways to get more out of Bijan Robinson than what we have seen so far. But, you know, in terms of actually having the expectations that he's going to be more than what he was last year, like I'm not going to go into the season with that. But at the same time, there's a part of me that's like, well, he is Mr. Walk on Water. You know, he is, you know.
Hey, man.
Anybody can do it.
Man, think it's so T. You know what I'm saying?
You know, if anybody can do it, like, I'm not going to bet against Bijan at this point.
Right. In my head, that little section from the halftime show. So you really about to do it? It's like that's playing in my head. But I hope so. Got you on that one, right, Jarvis?
Yes,
but
we did.
You make a great point. So I'm going to go there. When we start talking about some of Saquon Barkley's numbers, Jarvis, Aaron mentioned Bijan's referencing of Saquon. So some of those numbers are like video arcade-ish. I mean, it's crazy, right? But you got to have lofty expectations. You got to set high goals. And why wouldn't you set it with the guy who set the standard? And you look at what Saquon Barkley was able to do last season and how he built off of his first 6 seasons of what he did with the New York Giants and what he did with the Philadelphia Eagles is still mind-boggling. But let me give you the numbers so that we can talk about what a surprise set of numbers would look like for Bijan. For Saquon Barkley, now granted, he played a couple more games in 2024, so we keep that in mind. But still, the guy had 100 more carries in 24 versus 23. He had 2.5 times the number of yards. Go figure. He went from a 3.9 to a 5.8 average per carry. There are no words. I mean, there are no words. So I'm looking at those numbers and thinking, okay, the one thing that did jump out for me is the long. He had a long of 72 yards. And I know that is something that's important to Bijan Robinson, for him to be able to really, really, really get the ball down the field on carries and, you know, have those explosive carries. The reason I lay those numbers out is because if Saquon Barkley can do it in a season where he was walking away and people were questioning whether or not he could even be the Saquon Barkley he was in the last season with the Giants, why not Bijan Robinson give us some numbers that might surprise us?
You know what? And as you were talking, I was thinking about the similarities between Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley.
Ooh,
Those
that's a
guys
good
are
one
up
too,
there.
Jarvis.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Think about who's under center. Mobile quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson is the biggest, bestest athlete that I've probably ever seen in my life. And it hurts me in my soul to be able to say that because I grew up in Atlanta and I watched Michael Vick in the Georgia Dome. You know
And
what
I'm
I'm
a
saying?
Steelers fan, so it really hurts, but it's the truth.
Right. I understand your plight, T. I understand your plight. So so when you think about it from that standpoint, and Bijan even kind of touched on this too, like Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, there are linebackers that have to account for those guys every play. Every play. I don't care who you got at running back. I got to make sure my eyes are on this quarterback. That backside linebacker, he better be ready for 8 and number 1. You know, so when you think about it from that standpoint, you know, we had conversations about, okay, how can Michael Penix, you talked about it on last football party, we talking about how Michael Penix's legs can be a factor. That can maybe get you from a 4.8 to maybe a 5.2 yards per carry because you don't pop a couple of them because you know, Michael Penix Jr. maybe have kept a couple of those, you know, RPO situations, right, to kind of keep defenses honest, right? Because if that defensive end is crashing down, shoot, Michael Penix shows you that he can run. Look at that Carolina game. That dude got to that corner so doggone fast. And even Bijan was talking about that as well. He like, hey, man, Michael Penix is the athlete. He said, dude runs a 4.4. He can do it. But, you know, he had to kind of change from a style of play standpoint. He had to change, switch it up because, you know, man was out there getting hurt. So he had to change, switch it up. Sure. And I'm not sitting up here saying that Michael Penix should become this RPO quarterback and design runs and all that stuff. All I'm saying is all he has to do is put it on tape a couple times to get defenses to at least say, okay, it's possible that he can pull it out. That's all Bijan Robinson needs. That half a second, half a second of hesitation from that backside linebacker to not come down, or that defensive end not to come flying down, crashing down, and make the tackle from the backside like we saw TJ Watt do like all game last year against the Falcons. So I think that's the piece that can get Bijan to that next level because, you know, Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, they ate last year off of having those mobile quarterbacks that defenses have to be accountable for under center.
Yeah. I think mobile quarterbacks and also receivers who didn't mind, and tight ends that prided themselves in blocking. So I think those are all some critical pieces there as well. But yeah, Aaron, if you talk about the numbers for Saquon Barkley, and those are just his numbers on the run side of the ball. Like we didn't even talk about him as a pass catcher, which he is an incredible pass catcher, as well as Derrick Henry, by the way. He's prided himself in improving his skills over those first 9 seasons. And to think that guy could do the same thing, but actually even best Saquon Barkley in certain areas, just in terms of the gap in his average per carry, going up from 4.2, which he kind of hovered in that 4.2, 4.4 area for like the 3 years preceding him joining Baltimore, right? But again, get yourself a real O-line, get yourself some receivers and tight ends that want to block, and get yourself a mobile quarterback, and you too can go from 4.29 average to 5.9 yards per carry. It's sick.
That is so ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. But it can happen. It's the kind of things that I'm sure Ravens fans were pleasantly surprised to be able to see in that coaching staff, and I'm sure Lamar Jackson as well, just to know that he had a more complimentary piece there, taking nothing away from like J.K. Dobbins and what some of their previous running backs were able to do. But Derrick Henry, when you have that conversation, you light up because you know what he can bring in so many different aspects. So the numbers probably surprised them because they were so dramatically different, but not because of the ability. I feel like it's the same thing with Bijan Robinson. The ability is there, so we wouldn't be surprised there. But I'm sure there are still some numbers where it's like, he can even surprise you with what he might do this season.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just, you know, simple math where you're looking at 5.9 yards per carry for Derrick Henry last year, 4.8 for Bijan last year, you know, on like 300, that's 1.1 difference. If you're getting 300 carries, you know, that's like what, I don't know, 350 some odd yards or something. That's the difference. And so if you look at, okay, Bijan had almost 1,500 yards last year. You add another 350 yards. That's where you get to that close to that 1,900 yard range that Derrick Henry got to last year. And that's when you're pushing the 2,000 yards that Saquon Barkley had. And so when you think about that, you're like, okay, what is the difference? What is another 350, yards rushing? And it's like, okay, that's like 5 70-yard runs. That's really the difference. It's like a small percentage. It's like 1-2% of your runs are being broken for these bigger, longer runs than the sort of 20 and 30-yard runs that we've seen as the standard with Bijan Robinson these first 2 years. And so, whether that's coming from instances where Jarvis is talking about where that backside defender is keying on the quarterback instead of the running back and opening up a cutback lane for Bijan Robinson, whether that's Darnell Mooney being able to hit that block down the field against that corner that allows Bijan Robinson to just just outrun that safety's angle and get another 30 or 40 yards on that run. So those are the little things that are going to make the difference. And again, it's going to be 5 to 7 runs that make the difference between where Bijan Robinson is right now, which is a guy that you can probably reliably expect to get 1,400, 1,500 yards, this upcoming season, and potentially being that guy that can start. We will start having a conversation about, is he going to break 2,000 yards or something like that? Yeah. So it's not the gap between where Bijan is right now and where I think we all hope and want him to be is not that far. It's just, ultimately going to boil down to just the Falcons executing a little bit better.
Executing indeed. And Aaron talked about the biggest difference. Who's the assistant coach who's going to make the biggest difference for this Falcons team next season? We'll talk about it when we come back. So, Aaron, just like we started off earlier in the show talking about Jeff Ulbrich and keys to success, we've talked a lot about the importance of the impact of the coordinators, whether it's Zach Robinson and what he's going to do in his second year as an offensive coordinator, or if it's a guy like Jeff Ulbrich, who's likely eager for round 2 as a DC, but also round 2 under and partnering with Raheem Morris. That said, though, sometimes you got to dig deeper to find out who might really have that impact. That might be the O-line coach. That might be the D-line coach. But for you, when you look at the assistant coaches, which coach do you think can maybe have that biggest effect on this team reaching their goals, which, as we talked about before, is to get to the postseason?
Yeah, the low-hanging fruit would be to pick one of the coordinators. I'm not going to steal who Jarvis is going to pick because we know he's going to pick Nate Ollie. That's basically how, so I'll let Jarvis.
You'll let Jarvis have that?
Yeah, I'm going to let Jarvis have that. So I'm basically
I feel attacked.
Yeah, my decision is, okay, who's not a coordinator, who's not Nate Ollie. And, it goes back to what we were just talking about with Bijan Robinson. Like, you could make a pretty strong argument. Dwayne Ledford is going to be a huge part of what this run game is going to be. He's the run game coordinator. The Falcons have been very much a wide zone, outside zone, run blocking scheme for a long time. That is what they major in. That's what they'll continue to major in. But you do wonder, are we going to see a little bit more diversity in their run game that is going to help create opportunities for a guy like Bijan Robinson as well as Tyler Algier, and that feeds into the play action passing game, right? Where it comes to, a good play action passing game is going to be one that marries their run game with their passing game, meaning that defenses aren't going to necessarily know what's coming based off of the first, second and a half of a play, because it's going to all look the same and they're going to be keying on the run. And that's going to open up the passing game. And so, I think all of that is under the umbrella of Dwayne Ledford in addition to Zach Robinson. So I think Dwayne Ledford, how does he handle dealing with the loss of someone like a Drew Dahlman, who he's, had 3 years plus to work with. And we got the best version of Drew Dahlman when he was healthy this past season. And he was able to build that into a big time contract. Will we get a similar jump in play for Ryan Uzel? Will we get a similar jump in play for Matthew Bergeron, who's going into a pivotal sort of year 3? And I think Dwayne Ledford has a lot of, potential impact on what this offense can be. If they can have, when we're talking about, an Eagles or Ravens level run game in terms of, what they're able to produce, that's going to take so much pressure off of Michael Penix when this team can just simply say, you know what, guys, we're going to run the football, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. Like if they're that level of run game, and they're close, like they're one of the better run games in the NFL. But if you can reach that level where it's just like everybody knows who's getting the football, on any given down, and you're pretty much powerless to stop it. And they're still able to rack up, 150, 180, 200 plus rushing yards every single week because of all the different changes that they've had to the run game and just taking it to that next level. That to me is going to be huge. And I think Dwayne Ledford, the Falcons offensive line coach and run game coordinator, is going to be a huge part of bringing that type of ability to this offense this upcoming season.
Yeah. And Jarvis, I think that's why when you kind of look at what Dwayne Ledford has been able to do, that's why you keep him. That's why he's one of the holdovers from the previous regime, because the importance of what he's been able to do, and the success that this O-line has had has been so very much dictated by how he's been able to manage them. But that said, and even going back to the Arthur Smith time, one of the positives, one of the things that Arthur Smith was successful at was that run game. I think Aaron said it best, knowing that every game they would line up and say, okay, we're going to run this ball, try to stop us. So, yeah, I think he is going to be critical, just that he continues to have that O-line set up the way to be as successful as they have been. But also, I think, like you said, too, Aaron, being that run game coordinator, one of those guys who looks at the clock and who looks at the game and sees it bigger picture to help Raheem Morris with game management. Now, Jarvis, for you, are you going with the obvious, or are you going to shock the world and call out an assistant coach not named Nate Ollie? Why would you do that?
So T, you've been knowing me for a long time.
Yeah, you'll try to shock us, probably.
Yeah, I will try to shock you, but if I were to try to shock you, I'll be playing quote unquote radio. Well, I don't do that. I like to be as straight as possible when it comes to talking ball. So yes, Aaron, it is Nate Ollie. That is my doggone pick for the assistant coach that can help propel this team to the playoffs. We know that's what they want to do. And the reason why I believe that is, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier with Jeff Ulbrich and Root kind of having that same language, talking the same language, that verbiage, right? Attacking, making sure we're playing on their side of the football. We're playing on their side of the line of scrimmage. And I was even messing with Root when I asked him about Nate and like how he feels he can be better and all that stuff, because Nate Ollie, it was a little warm this week out there, and the man had a hoodie on, he had a doggone skull cap on. You know what I'm saying? I was like, hey man, what's that about? He was like, yeah man, that's him. That man is always a ball of energy. He said 7:00 in the morning, he out there chirping. You already know who it is. He's out there getting those guys riled up. He's just a ball of energy. As a matter of fact, Raheem Morris even said he prays that people take on that type of energy that Ollie brings to the table. And I think that not only the energy piece, right, that's cool. If you have that as a coach, oh my gosh, and you could teach, that's the most important part. He can teach too. He's elevated guys' game. I talked about Dale Adabango. I think I may have messed that up. Dale Anabango from the Colts, who ended up signing with the Bears, just got paid. Nate Ollie had a big piece of what, his development and being able to have him rush from outside and inside. And I talked about on Locked On Falcons how Zach Harrison can be that type of guy, because from a body type standpoint, the versatility standpoint, being able to rush outside, then be able to slide down the inside on pass rush downs. It's just lining up, I feel, because there are so many guys that haven't really played, but there's some talent there, right? They at least have some talent. They're getting drafted, the way they are. Brandon Dorless or Brandon Rook, and the collective that Raheem Morris try to put those guys in. So I think that Nate Ollie can be that guy to not only establish how guys should play up front, and you're only going to play if you play that way, and then implementing the scheme that is conducive to that mindset. So, because you can't be passive on the defensive line. I know people might think that's a simple statement. Man, you got to be semi-twisted to be successful up front, because you don't know what's coming, because you're constantly reacting to what's going on. You're trying to get off blocks, and you got to be able to have a quick instant of a reaction to how the offensive lineman is trying to block you, because once they put their hands on you and they running their feet, you got to figure out and make a decision. Either I'm going to get up field and try to get in the field to make a tackle or make a play on the ball carrier, or I'm going to try to fill them out. And that's what we saw last year. We saw a lot of that last year. So I feel like Nick Ollie is that guy to be able to handle those things and be able to set the tone up front of what the mindset should be going to Sundays. And I feel like he got the guys that can do it.
Yeah. Before I give my answer, Jarvis, I just have to get clarification on if you are up front, you have to be semi-twisted. Are we talking about in the mind or
just a little bit?
Like a little off?
You gotta be a little off. You gotta be a little
now,
off.
You know, Jarvis played up front. I'm just saying. So Jarvis,
hey man, like call spade. T. You know, you've been knowing me for a long time, man. I am a little twisted.
Hey, Aaron, I was just making sure I understood that he was saying, himself included, that the elevator wasn't going to the top floor. Just
since I gave my life to Christ, you know, the Lord has helped me. You know what I'm saying? Be a little bit more reserved in my older age. But, my gosh.
That's your grown self.
18 to 23. Ooh.
Yes. Debo was a terror.
I was a little different, T. Just a little bit.
Goodness. Just a little. But that said, I'm gonna take a little bit of liberty as your host because I know we said no coordinators, but I just gotta throw in Marquise because the special teams was off last year, right? And that's one thing that we on this show never have to talk about. The years that we've been doing this show, it's almost like a foregone conclusion that special teams for the Falcons will be on point. So I do think that a big component of the success for this team will be whether that's a Younghoe Koo or Lenny Craig or some other kicker who comes out. Can Craig can he be that guy, or can he come back and be the Younghoe Koo that he was in seasons past that basically gave the Falcons a couple wins versus last year maybe giving them a couple of losses, and can he continue to get more and more out of a Ray McLeod in terms of the return game? So I think that there's definitely something there. But that said, I just took a little liberty there. Ultimately, my guy, I'm going to pick Jerry Gray because I think that Jerry Gray might have maybe the most of an embarrassment of riches that he's had in terms of his ability to get the secondary to do some special things. So I like him. And of course, he is officially titled the assistant head coach on defense. So I also think that there are some spaces and places where he can continue to be that guy. Because again, when you're a holdover from the previous regime, that says a lot about what the new regime thinks she'll be able to do. So I think he'll be an assistant who could be critical to having that biggest effect on the Falcons to reach their goals. Real quick, before we wrap up, guys, let me challenge you to Aaron, Jarvis. Which assistant do you think maybe has the biggest challenge to get his position group right, to get his position group to step up?
Well, I think Jerry Gray's a good pick right there because, again, I still have questions about the secondary. Like we saw it late last season where, you know, when the defense and the pass rush was starting to get going, there was a couple of games where it's like, y'all getting cooked by Olamide Zaccheaus. Like, what's going? Like, I get it when Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson are beating you. Like, I get that. Like, you know, like, but like Olamide Zaccheaus, really? Like, that's the guy that y'all can't cover. You know, Zach Ertz. Like, we can't deal with these guys. And so, for this secondary to run it back with very similar players, and the only real major additions are rookies that are expected to come in and contribute. Like, I need these rookies to come in and move the needle for, you know, some of these matchups that you're going to have on the back end. So I think Jerry Gray, Justin Hood, the secondary coach, those guys have their work cut out for them to get the secondary to a point where, like, they're, you know, basically the Falcons offseason philosophy was we're going to invest up front and then we're just going to kind of run it back with the guys on the back end for the most part. And that investment up front is going to be the thing that pays dividends. And it's like, sure, yeah, I get that. I'm 100% about that. But at the same time, I'm like, is the secondary going to also make strides this upcoming season? So I think Jerry Gray is a good pick for that.
Who's the most criticized guy on the offensive side of the football? 8. So yeah, Kevin Koger is my pick. You know what I mean? How can you squeeze?
I was coming for him, but you got to it first.
How can you squeeze whatever you can get out of this man to at least make him look like he's about to get a second contract with his team? And I think that's going to be the key, right? How can you balance out the potential from a pass catching standpoint and figure out a way to get this dude to take blocking seriously, right? Like how can you do that? Whether that be, hey man, I need you to hit these weights. I need you to put on about 5 to 7 pounds. Forget gaining a half a second on your 40 time. I don't give a damn about that. I want you to beef up some so you can be able to handle yourself and not be sitting on the sidelines for most of the second half of the season because Charlie Warner is basically taking your spot. So yeah, I think Kevin Colbert is that guy that has to, I don't want to say it's pressure, but I do feel like it's one of those instances where, like, man, if you can somehow squeeze something out of this dude, that'll be a really good look for you.
Yeah. And I'm just going to co-sign on both your picks because I think for the very reasons that you guys mentioned, the secondary having to now step up to be complementary to what's up front. And I think getting the most, not the lesser, out of the guy that you keep getting the lesser, not the most out of. But in addition to that, figuring out how to keep Charlie Warner on Kyle Pitts' heels to make sure he understands that there is a guy that, hey, if you don't do it, I'm going to keep developing this guy into something, if nothing else, continuing to get him to be the blocker that he is and taking pride in blocking. But in addition to that, being an even better tight end in terms of contributing as an actual receiver, an actual pass catcher. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked on Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen. Check out Maria Martin, host of Sports Extra on Sundays on 11 Alive. She'll be back next week. And you can catch Jarvis as a frequent contributor for Locked on Falcons and Sports Extra. We'll see you next time.